At 68 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. 30 years as an emergency room nurse will do that to you. I'd held the hands of dying patients, comforted grieving families, and worked double shifts until my feet went numb. I raised my son Marcus alone after my husband died of a heart attack when the boy was only 12. I survived poverty, exhaustion, and the kind of bone-deep loneliness that comes with being widowed before 40. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I found when I drove up to my cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains that Friday morning in September. The cabin was my dream made real. 20 years ago, when I finally retired from nursing, I used every penny I'd saved to buy a piece of land in Asheville, North Carolina. The land came with an old, rundown structure that barely qualified as a building. For 2 years I spent every weekend driving the 4 hours from my apartment in Charlotte to work on that cabin. I learned carpentry from YouTube videos. I taught myself plumbing from library books. I painted every wall, sanded every floor, planted every flower in the garden. That cabin represented everything I'd accomplished in life. It was proof that Dorothy Henderson, the girl who grew up in a trailer park, the widow who raised a son on a nurse's salary, the woman who everyone underestimated, could build something beautiful with her own 2 hands. I pulled into the gravel driveway at 8 in the morning, expecting to find my cabin exactly as I'd left it 2 weeks ago. Clean, quiet, peaceful. Instead, I found 3 cars I didn't recognize parked in my spot. Music blasted from inside the house, loud enough to scare away every bird in the forest. Beer cans littered the front porch. My carefully tended flower beds had been trampled into mud. My hands shook as I turned off the engine. Something was very, very wrong. I walked slowly toward the front door, my nurse's instincts kicking in. Stay calm. Assess the situation. Don't panic until you have all the information. The door was unlocked, hanging slightly open. Through the gap, I could hear children screaming, adults laughing, the clatter of dishes and chaos. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The scene that greeted me made my heart drop into my stomach. My living room, the space I'd so carefully decorated with antique furniture and family photos, looked like a war zone. Air mattresses covered the floor. Dirty clothes hung over my rocking chair. Pizza boxes overflowed from the trash can. My handmade quilt, the one my mother gave me before she died, was crumpled in a corner with what looked like grape juice stains. 2 teenagers I'd never seen before sat on my couch playing video games on a TV that definitely wasn't mine. A man in a Hawaiian shirt lounged in my favorite reading chair, feet up on my coffee table. A baby cried somewhere upstairs, and then I saw her. Brianna, my daughter-in-law, stood in the doorway to the kitchen, wearing my apron, the one I'd embroidered myself with little blue flowers. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her face twisted into an expression of annoyed surprise when she spotted me. We stared at each other for a long moment. Then she turned toward the kitchen and yelled, "Ashley, your mother-in-law is here." Not Dorothy. Not Marcus's mother. Your mother-in-law. Like I was some stranger who'd wandered in off the street. A woman appeared behind Brianna. I recognized her from Marcus and Brianna's wedding 5 years ago. Ashley Morgan, Brianna's younger sister. She looked me up and down with the same dismissive expression her sister wore. "Brianna," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. "What's going on here? This is my cabin. Why are you and your family in my cabin?" Brianna laughed. Not a pleasant laugh. It was the kind of laugh that made me feel small and foolish, like I'd just asked the stupidest question in the world. "Oh, come on, Dorothy. Marcus told us we could use the place whenever we wanted. You're only here, what, 1 weekend a month? It's such a waste for this beautiful cabin to sit empty all the time when we have kids who could use the space." I felt like I'd been slapped. Marcus told them they could use my cabin that I built with my own hands, that I paid for with my own money, without asking me first. "Where's Marcus?" I asked, my voice coming out harder than I intended. "Working, obviously," Brianna said, crossing her arms. Unlike some people, he has real responsibilities. The insult hung in the air between us. Unlike some people, meaning me, meaning that at 68, retired after 3 decades of saving lives in an emergency room, I apparently had no real responsibilities. An older woman emerged from my kitchen holding a cup of coffee in my favorite mug, the one Marcus gave me for Mother's Day 15 years ago. She had Brianna's sharp features and cold eyes. "Is this her?" the woman asked Brianna, looking at me like I was something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "Yeah, Mom. This is Dorothy." The woman, who I assumed was Patricia Morgan, Brianna's mother, studied me with obvious disapproval. I thought she'd be taller. "You made her sound more intimidating." They'd been talking about me, planning this, discussing how to handle me when I inevitably showed up. "Look, Dorothy," Brianna said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone like she was explaining something to a particularly slow child. "We need to have a serious conversation about this place, but right now is not a good time. We have the whole family here for the weekend." Ashley drove all the way from Tennessee with her kids. My mom came from Florida. We've got activities planned, meals prepared. You're showing up unexpected like this is really inconsiderate. Inconsiderate. I was being inconsiderate by showing up to my own cabin without warning. "This is my house, Brianna. I don't need permission to be here. Technically, it's Marcus's house too, isn't it? Since you're family? What's yours is his and what's his is mine. That's how marriage works." Before I could respond, a young boy, maybe 7 years old, ran through the living room and crashed into my antique side table. The lamp I'd bought at an estate sale, a beautiful Tiffany reproduction, tipped over and shattered on the hardwood floor. "Tyler, be careful!" Brianna yelled, but she didn't move to clean it up. She just looked at the broken glass and shrugged. "Kids, you know, they get excited. That lamp cost me $400. I'd saved for 3 months to buy it. I think you all need to leave," I said, my voice shaking now. "This is my property, and you're here without my permission." Brianna's expression changed. The fake sweetness vanished, replaced by something cold and hard. She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume. "What are you going to do, Dorothy? Call the cops on your own family? Tell them that your son's wife and children are using a vacation home that never gets used anyway? How do you think that would look?" Ashley laughed behind her. "Can you imagine? Officer, please arrest my grandchildren for playing in a cabin that my son has every right to." "Marcus doesn't have any right to this cabin," I said firmly. "It's in my name. I paid for it. Every single board, every nail, every dollar came from my pocket." Patricia Morgan set down her coffee mug and walked toward me. "You know what I think. I think you're being selfish. You're an old woman living alone in a tiny apartment in Charlotte. What do you need a big cabin for? Just to sit here and feel important? Brianna and Marcus have children, growing children who need space and fresh air and family time. But you'd rather keep this place all to yourself, like some kind of miser." The word hit me like a physical blow. Miser. She was calling me a miser for wanting to keep the property I'd worked 30 years to afford. "I think you need to understand something," Brianna said, her voice dropping low. "Things are changing. Marcus and I have been talking, and we both agreed that it doesn't make sense for you to hold on to this place. You're getting older. You're going to need care eventually. Wouldn't it be smarter to let us take over the cabin now while you can still enjoy visiting us here, rather than waiting until you're too old to make good decisions?" There it was, the real agenda. They didn't just want to use my cabin, they wanted to take it from me. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me." I said, "Get out. All of you. You have no right to be here." Brianna smiled, and it was the cruelest smile I'd ever seen. "Actually, Dorothy, we do have the right. Marcus gave us permission, and if you try to make trouble, we'll just have to have a conversation with him about your recent behavior. He's been worried about you, you know. Forgetting things, getting confused, making poor decisions. We've been concerned about your mental state." The implication was clear. They were threatening to declare me mentally incompetent. "We don't have room for you here anyway," Ashley added. "All the bedrooms are taken, the couch is covered with kids' stuff. Maybe you should just go back to Charlotte and let us enjoy our family weekend. We'll talk about all this later, when everyone's calmer." I looked around at the destruction of my beautiful cabin, at the strangers occupying my space, at the family that clearly saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. And then I did something that surprised even me. I smiled. "You're absolutely right," I said calmly. "This isn't the time for a serious conversation. I apologize for the intrusion. I'll let you all enjoy your weekend." Brianna looked suspicious, like she couldn't quite believe I was giving up so easily. "Really? Really? Family is important. I wouldn't want to ruin your plans." I turned and walked out of my cabin, got in my car and drove away. In my rearview mirror I saw Brianna and Ashley standing on the porch, watching me leave. They were laughing, probably congratulating themselves on handling the difficult old woman so easily. They had no idea what they just started. I drove straight to the Asheville Plaza Hotel and checked into a room. $85 for the night, money I hadn't planned to spend because I was supposed to be sleeping in my own bed. But as I sat on the hotel room balcony, looking out at the mountains in the distance, I didn't feel defeated. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A cold, calculating anger. The kind of anger that doesn't make you scream or cry. The kind that makes you think very clearly about exactly what needs to be done. Brianna had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed that because I was old, I was weak, because I was alone, I was helpless. Because I'd spent my life taking care of others, I wouldn't know how to fight back. She was about to learn that Dorothy Henderson, who'd survived 30 years in one of the toughest emergency rooms in North Carolina, who'd raised a son alone, who'd built a cabin with her bare hands, was not someone to underestimate. I pulled out my phone and started making calls. First to my bank, then to the locksmith, then to someone I'd hoped I'd never need to call. Tomorrow was going to be a very different day for Brianna and her family. Tomorrow they were going to learn that actions have consequences, and the lesson was going to cost them more than they could possibly imagine. I slept better that night than I had in months. Because for the first time in a long time, I had a purpose, and that purpose was justice. The next morning, I woke up at 6. Old nursing habits die hard. I made coffee in the hotel room's tiny machine, and sat down with a notebook to organize my thoughts. 30 years of nursing taught me one critical skill that would serve me well now. Documentation. In the ER, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Evidence was everything. I started making a list. Every item I'd noticed missing or damaged. The Tiffany lamp. My mother's quilt. The trampled flower garden. The beer cans on the porch. My porcelain dishes that I glimpsed in the sink. Several with chips and cracks. Each item got its own line with an estimated value. Then, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. I needed to know exactly what resources I had available for what was coming next. The numbers appeared on the screen, and I allowed myself a small smile. Checking account, $45,000. Savings account, $340,000. Certificates of deposit, $89,000. Total liquid assets, $474,000. Marcus and Brianna thought I was a poor retired nurse living on Social Security and a small pension. They had no idea that I'd been saving and investing aggressively for 40 years. No idea that I'd lived in a modest apartment, not because I couldn't afford better, but because I was building wealth. No idea that every extra shift I'd worked, every vacation I'd skipped, every luxury I'd denied myself, had gone straight into my retirement accounts. I'd grown up poor. I'd watched my parents struggle and scrape and still lose everything. I'd sworn that would never happen to me, and it hadn't. Dorothy Henderson was not wealthy by some standards, but I had enough money to protect myself. And more importantly, I had enough money to fight back. At 8 o'clock I called my bank. The manager, Charles Richardson, had known me for 15 years. "Dorothy, How are you? Haven't seen you in a while. I'm well, Charles, but I need some help with a legal matter. His tone shifted immediately to professional concern. Of course. What's going on? I explained the situation in brief, clinical terms. My property had been occupied without my permission. My family was attempting to claim rights to it. I needed legal protection, and I needed the name of the best family law attorney in Asheville, Jonathan Price, Charles said without hesitation. He's expensive, but he's the best. Specializes in elder law and family property disputes. I'll call him personally and tell him to expect your call. Thank you, Charles. One more thing. I need you to freeze any attempts by third parties to access my accounts. And I need a formal letter from the bank confirming my mental competency to manage my own finances. There was a pause. Dorothy, are they trying to declare you incompetent? I believe that's the plan. Those bastards. Charles rarely cursed. I'll have that letter ready by this afternoon. Notarized and official. And Dorothy? Give them hell. 20 minutes later, Jonathan Price's secretary called me back. Mr. Price can see you at 2 o'clock this afternoon. He says Charles Richardson's referrals are always his top priority. I spent the rest of the morning driving back to the cabin. I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car down the road and took photographs. The beer cans still littering the porch, the destroyed flower garden, the cars filling my driveway. Through the windows, I could see people moving around inside, completely at ease in my space. I also made notes of everyone I could identify. Brianna and Marcus's kids, Kaylee and Tyler, Ashley and her 2 teenage sons. Patricia Morgan, a man I didn't recognize who seemed to be Patricia's boyfriend or husband. At least 10 people total, all occupying my cabin like they owned it. At noon, I drove back into town and had lunch at a quiet diner. The waitress, a woman about my age, saw me sitting alone and asked if I was okay. Just dealing with some family trouble, I told her. She nodded sympathetically. Family's the worst sometimes. They're the ones who know exactly how to hurt you. She had no idea how right she was. At 2 o'clock sharp, I walked into the offices of Price and Associates. The building was elegant, all dark wood and leather chairs. The secretary led me to Jonathan Price's office immediately. Jonathan Price was in his mid-50s, with gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He stood when I entered and shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Henderson, Charles Richardson speaks very highly of you. Please, sit down and tell me everything. I spent the next hour telling him the whole story. I showed him the photographs. I showed him my documentation of damages. I gave him the deed to the cabin, proving sole ownership. I explained Brianna's threats about my mental competency. Jonathan listened without interrupting, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and smiled. Mrs. Henderson, I have good news and better news. The good news is your case is extremely strong. We have illegal trespassing, property damage and attempted coercion. The better news is that if they're planning to challenge your mental competency, they're walking straight into a legal trap. How so? Any attempt to declare someone mentally incompetent requires medical evaluation, court hearings, and substantial evidence. From what you've told me, and based on this conversation, you're clearly of sound mind. If they try to move forward with that, we can counter-sue for elder abuse, defamation, and attempted fraud. It would destroy them legally and financially. What's the first step? Tomorrow morning, we file an immediate eviction notice for illegal trespassing. North Carolina law is very clear. The property is in your name alone. They have no legal right to be there without your explicit permission. We can have them removed within 48 hours. How much will this cost? My retainer is $5,000. For a case like this, full resolution will probably run about $15,000 total. I pulled out my checkbook. I'll pay you $10,000 right now. Consider it a retainer and a down payment. Jonathan's eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Henderson, I only need $5,000 to start. I want you to know I'm serious about this. I want them to understand that I have the resources to fight as long as necessary. Can you make this as public as possible? Court records are public. In a town like Asheville, a case involving family elder abuse would definitely attract attention, especially if it goes to the media. I want it to go to the media. I want everyone they know to understand exactly what they tried to do. Jonathan studied me for a moment. Mrs. Henderson, I have to ask, if we pursue this aggressively, your relationship with your son may never recover. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Marcus, about the little boy I'd raised alone, about working double shifts so he could go to college, about buying his first car, helping with his house down payment, always being there when he needed me, about how he'd changed after marrying Brianna, becoming distant and demanding and entitled. Mr. Price, my son stood by and let his wife humiliate me in my own home. He gave her permission to occupy my property without asking me. He's apparently been discussing my mental competency behind my back. If our relationship can be destroyed so easily, then it was never much of a relationship to begin with. Jonathan nodded slowly. Then let's give them a lesson they'll never forget. I'll have the paperwork ready first thing tomorrow morning. I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Power, not the kind of power that comes from controlling others, but the power that comes from knowing you can protect yourself, from knowing you're not helpless, not weak, not the victim they thought you'd be. That evening, I received a text message from Marcus. Mom, Brianna says you stopped by and were upset about us using the cabin. We need to talk about this. You're overreacting. I stared at the message for a long time. Overreacting, that's what he thought, that his elderly mother was just being emotional and unreasonable. I didn't respond. Tomorrow my response would arrive in the form of legal documents. Let that be my answer. I ordered room service for dinner. Something I never did, because it seemed too expensive and wasteful. But that night, sitting on my hotel balcony, with a nice meal and a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the mountains, I didn't feel guilty at all. Tomorrow the war began, and I was ready. Tuesday morning arrived with clear blue skies and a crispness in the air that promised fall was coming. I met Jonathan Price at his office at 7:30. He handed me a folder full of legal documents. Everything's ready. I've also arranged for a police escort and a notary public to witness the eviction notice being served. Are you ready for this? I've been ready since Friday. We drove in convoy to my cabin. Jonathan in his sleek BMW, me in my practical Honda, and behind us a sheriff's vehicle with 2 officers. I'd called ahead and explained the situation. The officers had been sympathetic. Apparently, elder abuse cases were becoming more common. When we pulled into the driveway at exactly 8 o'clock, I saw Brianna through the kitchen window, making breakfast. She glanced out, saw the vehicles, and her face went white. She dropped whatever she was holding and ran deeper into the house. By the time we reached the front door, several people had gathered. Brianna, Ashley, Patricia, and the man I now knew was Patricia's husband, Tom. The teenagers appeared at the top of the stairs, and I could hear Tyler and Kaylee somewhere in the back of the house. Sheriff Deputy Williams stepped forward, official and imposing in his uniform. I'm looking for Brianna Henderson, Ashley Morgan, and Patricia Morgan. That's us, Brianna said, her voice shaky. What's this about? Jonathan stepped forward. I'm Jonathan Price, attorney for Dorothy Henderson, the legal owner of this property. I'm here to serve you with an immediate eviction notice for illegal trespassing and property damage. He handed them each a set of papers. Brianna's hands shook as she read the first page. Illegal trespassing? This is my husband's mother's house. We have permission. Do you have written permission from Mrs. Henderson? Jonathan asked calmly. Well, no, but Marcus said. Marcus Henderson is not the property owner and has no legal authority to grant you permission to occupy this residence. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises within 2 hours. Any personal belongings you remove must be verified to ensure you're not taking property belonging to Mrs. Henderson. Patricia's face turned red with anger. This is ridiculous. We're family. You can't just throw us out like common criminals. Actually, ma'am, I can, Deputy Williams said. You're occupying private property without the owner's consent. That's trespassing. Mrs. Henderson has every legal right to remove you immediately. Ashley pulled out her phone. I'm calling Marcus. He'll straighten this out. You're welcome to call him, Jonathan said. But it won't change the legal situation. You have 2 hours. As if on cue, a car came speeding up the driveway, kicking up gravel. Marcus jumped out, his tie crooked, his hair messy like he'd dressed in a hurry. Someone must have called him the moment they saw the police. What the hell is going on here? He demanded, looking from the officers to me. Mom, what are you doing? Your family is being legally evicted from my property for trespassing, I said calmly. Trespassing? Mom, they're not trespassers, they're your family. Jonathan stepped between us. Mr. Henderson, I'm Jonathan Price, your mother's attorney. I also have something for you. He handed Marcus another set of papers. You're being served with a notice of legal action for complicity in attempted fraud and abuse of an elderly person. Marcus stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language. Fraud? Abuse? Mom, have you lost your mind? No, Marcus, I haven't. But apparently you and your wife tried to convince people I had. We found the documents in my cabin. The plans to declare me mentally incompetent. The property transfer paperwork. The appraisal you had done without my knowledge or consent. His face went from confused to pale in seconds. I can explain that. It's not what it looks like. Mr. Henderson, Deputy Williams interrupted. I suggest you help your family gather their belongings. They have 1 hour and 55 minutes remaining. The next 2 hours were absolute chaos. Brianna screamed and cried, throwing clothes into garbage bags. Ashley yelled at her teenagers to pack faster. Patricia sat on the porch steps, sobbing dramatically about being treated like a criminal. Tom tried to reason with the officers, asking if this was really necessary for a simple family misunderstanding. The children were confused and scared. Tyler kept asking why they had to leave. Kaylee cried quietly in a corner. I felt a pang of sympathy for them. They were innocent in all this. But their parents had made choices, and consequences followed choices. Marcus tried multiple times to talk to me, but I refused to engage. Every time he approached, Jonathan stepped between us. Mom, please! Let's just talk about this like adults. Brianna made some mistakes. I admit that, but this is going way too far. You're going to destroy our whole family over a misunderstanding. Finally, I spoke. Marcus, when I stood in this cabin on Friday and your wife called me a burden, when she told me there was no room for me in my own house, when she threatened to have me declared mentally incompetent so you could steal my property, that's when you destroyed our family. I'm just making sure there are consequences. I didn't know about the mental competency thing. That was Brianna's lawyer's idea. I never agreed to it, but you didn't stop it either. You stood by and let your wife disrespect and threaten your mother. You gave away access to my property without asking. You participated in getting my cabin appraised so you could sell it without my knowledge. Don't pretend you're innocent in this, Marcus. You made your choices. Brianna overheard our conversation and stormed over. Oh, this is rich. You're going to play the victim? You're a lonely old woman who hoards property you barely use while we struggle to give our children a decent life. This cabin should belong to family who'll actually use it, not someone who visits once a month. This cabin belongs to the person whose name is on the deed, Jonathan said firmly. And that person is Dorothy Henderson. She's senile. She doesn't know what she's doing. Marcus, tell them. Tell them how she forgets things, how she gets confused. Marcus opened his mouth, then closed it. For a brief moment, I saw something in his eyes. Shame, maybe, or the realization that he'd gone too far down a path he couldn't back away from. I forget things sometimes, I said quietly. Most 68-year-olds do. But I'm not senile, I'm not incompetent, and I'm definitely not going to let you steal from me. With 30 minutes left, Marcus pulled me aside one final time. Mom, I know I messed up. But if you go through with this, if you actually press charges, I could lose my job. The HR department is already asking questions. My reputation will be destroyed. Is that what you want? To see your own son ruined? I looked at the man standing before me. Somewhere inside him was the little boy I'd raised, the one who used to hold my hand when he was scared, who'd cried in my arms when his father died. But that boy was long gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. What I want, Marcus, is for you to have thought about consequences before you and your wife tried to rob me. What I want is for you to have defended me when Brianna disrespected me in my own home. What I want is for you to have been the son I raised instead of the man you've become. But we don't always get what we want, do we? I can't believe you're doing this to me. I'm not doing this to you, Marcus. You did this to yourself. At exactly 10 o'clock, Deputy Williams announced time was up. Brianna's family piled into their cars, bags and boxes stuffed haphazardly into trunks and back seats. Patricia was still crying, Ashley was furious, Tom looked bewildered, and the children looked traumatized. Brianna was the last to leave. She stopped at her car and turned to face me. This isn't over. We'll appeal. We'll get lawyers, we'll prove you're unstable. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, you bitter old bitch. Jonathan stepped forward. Mrs. Henderson, I should advise you that every threat you just made was witnessed by law enforcement and will be documented. If you continue harassing my client, we'll add that to the growing list of charges. Brianna got in her car and slammed the door. Marcus sat in his car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. Then he drove away without looking back. When the last car disappeared down the driveway, I stood on my porch and looked at my cabin. My home. My dream. It was still mine. Deputy Williams approached. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know we see cases like this more often than you'd think. Family members trying to take advantage of elderly relatives. You did the right thing standing up for yourself. Thank you, Deputy. I appreciate your help today. After the officers and Jonathan left, I walked slowly through my cabin. The damage was worse than I'd thought. In the master bedroom, someone had gone through my dresser, and several items of jewelry were missing. My mother's pearl earrings, my late husband's watch, a silver bracelet my father gave me when I graduated nursing school. In the living room, I found the hidden compartment behind my bookshelf standing open. That's where I'd kept important documents, birth certificates, insurance papers, my will, and that's where I'd discovered something the day after I'd been kicked out. I'd driven back early Saturday morning, while they were all sleeping, and snuck in to check. What I found made my blood run cold. There were documents in that compartment that didn't belong to me, legal papers with Marcus and Brianna's names on them, a petition for conservatorship, claiming I was mentally incompetent to manage my affairs, a property transfer form, ready to be filed as soon as the conservatorship was granted, a medical evaluation from a Dr. Richard Chen at a cheap clinic in South Charlotte diagnosing me with advanced dementia and declaring me unable to make sound decisions. I had never been to that clinic. I had never met Dr. Chen. The medical evaluation was completely fabricated. But the worst part was the handwritten notepaper, clipped to the real estate appraisal. The appraisal valued my cabin at $850,000. The note in Brianna's handwriting said, "Once we get this cabin, we can sell it and finally get the lake house we deserve. R just needs to sign and keep the old lady quiet." They weren't just trying to use my cabin, they were planning to sell it out from under me, pocket nearly $1 million, and use the money to buy themselves a different property. And they were going to do it by lying to a court, producing fake medical documents, and having me declared mentally incompetent. That's when I'd known this wasn't just a family dispute. It was fraud. It was elder abuse. It was criminal. And that's why I'd hired Jonathan Price and gone to war. Now, standing in my reclaimed cabin, I pulled out my phone and called him. "Jonathan, I need to add something to the case. Grand theft, fraud, and falsification of medical documents. I have evidence of all of it." Bring everything to my office this afternoon. Mrs. Henderson, we're not just talking about a civil case anymore. This could become criminal charges. Good, I said. I want them to face every consequence the law allows. After I hung up, I sat down on my porch and looked out at the mountains. The view I'd worked 30 years to afford, the dream I'd built with my own hands, and I made a promise to myself. Dorothy Henderson would never be a victim again. Not to her family, not to anyone. And anyone who tried to take advantage of her would learn exactly how expensive that mistake could be. The war was just beginning, but I'd already won the first battle, and I had no intention of losing the rest. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal activity. Jonathan Price proved to be worth every penny I paid him. He moved fast, and he moved decisively. First, we filed a police report for the stolen jewelry. The police took my statement, photographed the evidence, and opened an investigation. The value of the missing items exceeded $5,000, which meant it qualified as felony theft in North Carolina. Second, Jonathan contacted the North Carolina Medical Board about Dr. Richard Chen. Within 48 hours, they opened an investigation into the falsified medical evaluation. It turned out Dr. Chen had a history of selling fake disability forms and medical excuses. My case was the final straw. His medical license was suspended pending a full review. Third, and most importantly, Jonathan filed formal charges against Marcus and Brianna for attempted fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit theft. Because the total value involved exceeded $50,000 and included fraudulent legal documents, it was classified as a serious felony. I received updates almost daily from Jonathan's office. Each one brought news that would have devastated me a month ago, but now just felt like justice being served. Marcus and Brianna had to hire their own lawyers. Good lawyers weren't cheap. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that they'd already spent more than $20,000 in legal fees, and the case hadn't even gone to trial yet. The story spread through Asheville like wildfire. In a small town, scandal travels fast, and this was quite a scandal. Local son and his wife caught, trying to defraud and steal from his elderly mother, involving fake medical documents, and a plot to have her declared mentally incompetent. The kind of story people talked about over coffee and shook their heads at during church services. Marcus's employer, a mid-sized tech company, launched an HR investigation. When details of the criminal charges became public record, Marcus was placed on administrative leave. His reputation in the industry took a serious hit. Brianna's dreams of becoming a social media influencer evaporated overnight. Several small sponsors she'd been working with dropped her immediately. Her Instagram followers started leaving angry comments once word spread about what she'd done. Some of her posts got shared with captions like, "This is the woman who tried to steal from her elderly mother-in-law." About 3 weeks after the eviction, I got a phone call from Ashley, Brianna's sister. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mrs. Henderson, please. I'm begging you. Brianna is falling apart. Marcus has spent $30,000 on lawyers and they still haven't even gone to court yet. His job is in jeopardy. Their marriage is in trouble. The kids are confused and scared. Please, can't we work something out?" "Work what out, Ashley? They tried to rob me. They falsified medical documents. They planned to have me declared mentally incompetent so they could steal nearly $1 million from me." "I know. And that was wrong. So wrong. But Brianna has kids to take care of. Marcus could lose everything. Don't you have any compassion?" I had compassion when I worked double shifts, so Marcus could go to a good college. I had compassion when I helped with his house down payment. I had compassion when I supported him through every difficult moment of his life. Where was his compassion when his wife called me a burden? Where was his compassion when he stood by and let her kick me out of my own home? "But you already got your cabin back. You won. Why keep punishing them?" "Because getting my cabin back doesn't undo the humiliation. It doesn't return my mother's stolen jewelry. It doesn't erase the fact that my own son was willing to destroy my life for money." Actions have consequences, Ashley. Real consequences. They're willing to return the jewelry. It's at my mother's house. They took it by mistake during the confusion. By mistake? They accidentally stole my dead mother's pearls and my late husband's watch during the confusion of illegally occupying my home. Ashley was quiet for a moment. What do you want from them? What would it take for you to drop the charges? I don't want anything from them. That's the point. I want them to face the legal consequences of their choices. I want Marcus to understand that betraying your family has a cost. I want Brianna to learn that you can't just take what isn't yours. And I want every other person who thinks elderly people are easy targets to see what happens when we fight back. You're destroying their lives. No, Ashley. They destroyed their own lives. I'm just refusing to be their victim. She hung up on me. I felt a small pang of regret. Not for what I was doing, but for how it had come to this. But the regret didn't change my mind. I'd spent too many years watching people in the ER suffer consequences of others' bad decisions. Drunk drivers who hurt innocent people. Abusers who traumatized their families. Neglectful caretakers who let vulnerable people suffer. I'd always believed in accountability. And now I was ensuring that Marcus and Brianna were held accountable for what they'd done. 2 days later, Brianna showed up at my apartment in Charlotte. I saw her through the peephole standing in the hallway with a shopping bag in her hands. She looked terrible. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. No makeup, a far cry from the polished, confident woman who'd kicked me out of my own cabin. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. Dorothy, thank you for seeing me. I didn't say you could come in. Say what you came to say. She held up the shopping bag. I brought your jewelry. All of it. The pearls, the watch, the bracelet, everything. I'm returning it all. And I came to apologize. Apologize for stealing it, or apologize for getting caught. Her face crumpled. I know you have every right to hate me. What I did was terrible. I was desperate and stupid and I made horrible choices. But please, Dorothy. Marcus could go to jail. We could lose our house. The kids could end up in foster care if we both get convicted. Is that what you want? To see your grandchildren in the system? Don't use those children as emotional leverage. You should have thought about them before you committed felonies. I wasn't thinking clearly. We're drowning in debt. Marcus made some bad investments last year, and we lost almost $40,000. Our mortgage is 3 months behind. The credit cards are maxed out. The kids' school tuition is due, and we don't have it. When Marcus mentioned you had this cabin you barely used, it just seemed like it was sitting there empty while we were struggling. It seemed unfair. So you decided to steal it. Not steal it. Just use it. And then, when we realized how valuable it was, we thought maybe if it was officially Marcus's property, we could get a loan against it or something. The lawyer said the easiest way was the conservatorship thing. He said it was just paperwork, that it wouldn't really hurt you. Just paperwork that declared me mentally incompetent. Just paperwork that would have stripped me of my legal rights. Just paperwork that would have let you sell my property without my consent. Brianna started crying. I know it was wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking you to show mercy. Please, drop the criminal charges. We'll pay for the damages. We'll give back everything. We'll never contact you again, if that's what you want. Just please don't send Marcus to prison. I looked at this woman, who'd called me a burden, who'd kicked me out of my own home, who'd plotted to rob me and destroy my independence. And I felt something unexpected. Not sympathy. Exactly, but a weary recognition that she was a person who'd made terrible choices, and was now facing the consequences. Brianna, I'm going to tell you something I learned in 30 years of nursing. When someone comes into the ER with an injury from their own bad decision, we don't refuse to treat them. We patch them up. But we also don't lie to them and say everything is fine. We tell them the truth. You broke the law. You committed fraud. You tried to steal from an elderly person. Those are serious crimes with serious consequences. And no amount of begging or crying or returning stolen jewelry changes that. So that's it? You're just going to destroy us? I'm going to let the legal system do what it's designed to do. Hold people accountable for their actions. Marcus is your son. Marcus stopped being my son when he chose to betray me for money. Now he's just another person who committed a crime and has to face justice. I took the shopping bag with my jewelry and closed the door in her face. Through the door, I heard her sobbing in the hallway. I didn't open it again. That night, I went through the returned jewelry piece by piece. Everything was there, except one item: my husband's college ring, a simple gold band with a small ruby. It had no significant monetary value, maybe $100, but it was the first gift he'd ever given me when we were dating. I'd treasured it for 45 years. It was still missing. Either Brianna had forgotten about it, or she'd kept it back, or it had been lost, or sold. Either way, it was gone. One more thing I'd never get back. The trial date was set for early November. Jonathan prepared me thoroughly. We went over my testimony, discussed potential questions from the defense, reviewed all the evidence. He was confident we'd win, but cautioned me that Marcus and Brianna might take a plea deal to avoid trial. Most defendants in cases like this accept a plea bargain, he explained. They plead guilty to reduce charges, pay fines, do community service, get probation. It's cheaper and less risky than going to trial and potentially getting convicted on all charges. What kind of sentence would they get with a plea deal? Probably no jail time if they're first-time offenders. Significant fines, maybe $30,000 to $40,000 each. Several hundred hours of community service, 3 to 5 years probation, and permanent criminal records. And if they go to trial and lose, then they're looking at potential prison time. 2 to 5 years for fraud of this magnitude. Plus higher fines and longer probation. What do you think they'll do? Take the deal. Going to trial would cost them another $50,000 in legal fees minimum, and they'd probably lose anyway. The evidence against them is overwhelming. He was right. 2 weeks before the trial date, Marcus and Brianna's lawyer contacted Jonathan to negotiate a plea agreement. After several days of back and forth, they reached a settlement. Marcus and Brianna would each plead guilty to attempted fraud and conspiracy. They would each pay a fine of $35,000. They would each complete 300 hours of community service. They would be on probation for 3 years. They would have permanent criminal records. Additionally, they were required to pay restitution for the damaged and stolen property, which came to another $8,000 total, and they were prohibited from contacting me directly for the duration of their probation, unless I initiated contact first. When Jonathan called to tell me the final terms, he asked if I wanted to accept the deal or push for trial. Accept it, I said. I don't need to see them in prison. I just need them to understand that what they did had real, permanent consequences. The plea hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning in early November. I didn't attend. I didn't need to see Marcus and Brianna stand before a judge and admit their guilt. I knew they'd do it because they had no choice. Instead, I spent that day at my cabin, planting bulbs for next spring's garden, tulips and daffodils that would bloom in March and April, bringing color back to the flower beds that had been destroyed. As I worked in the cool autumn air, my phone rang. It was Jonathan. It's done. They took the plea, both convicted. All terms accepted. The judge was pretty harsh with them during sentencing. Told them they should be ashamed of themselves for trying to exploit an elderly family member. How did they take it? Brianna cried through the whole thing. Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear. The kids were in the courtroom. That was hard to watch. Kaylee and Tyler had seen their parents convicted of crimes against their grandmother. That thought made my chest hurt. Those children hadn't done anything wrong, but they'd carry this shame anyway. Jonathan, I want to set up college funds for the kids. $5,000 each to be held in trust until they turn 18. Can you handle that anonymously? There was a pause. After everything their parents did to you, you want to give them money for college? The kids didn't do anything wrong, and I don't want them to suffer more than they already will from their parents' choices. You're a better person than most, Mrs. Henderson. I'm just a grandmother who doesn't want innocent children to pay for their parents' sins. After we hung up, I went back to planting bulbs. The physical work felt good. Therapeutic. Each bulb I placed in the ground was an act of faith that spring would come, that beauty could grow, even after destruction, that life would continue. Over the next few months, my life slowly returned to normal. I spent weekends at the cabin, enjoying the peace and solitude. I joined a support group for elder abuse survivors and found myself sharing my story with others who'd faced similar situations. Many of them hadn't been as lucky as me. They'd lost everything because they didn't have the resources or knowledge to fight back. I became a volunteer advocate, helping other elderly people navigate the legal system when their families tried to take advantage of them. I gave talks at senior centers about protecting yourself financially and legally. I shared my story not because I was proud of having to wage war against my own son, but because I wanted others to know they didn't have to be victims. Christmas came and went without contact from Marcus. I sent presents to Kaylee and Tyler through Ashley, who'd become a reluctant intermediary. Nice gifts, but nothing extravagant. I wanted them to know I still thought of them, even if their parents and I were estranged. On New Year's Day, I received a letter in the mail. The return address was Marcus's. I almost threw it away without opening it, but curiosity won out. The letter was short, handwritten, his familiar scrawl filling a single page. Mom, I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness. What I did was inexcusable. I let Brianna convince me that you wouldn't mind sharing the cabin, and then I let things spiral completely out of control. I should have stood up for you. I should have protected you. Instead, I betrayed you in the worst way possible. Brianna and I are divorced now. The stress and the guilt and the money problems were too much. The kids live with me during the week, and with her on weekends. I'm working 2 jobs now to pay off the legal fees and fines. Everything is hard, but I'm not writing to ask for sympathy. I'm writing to say I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And to say that I understand if you never want to speak to me again, but I hope someday you might let me try to earn back even a small piece of your trust. Your son, Marcus. I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond, not because I didn't have feelings about it, but because I wasn't ready to articulate what those feelings were. Anger, sadness, disappointment, a tiny sliver of hope, all mixed together in a complicated knot I couldn't untangle yet. Spring came to the mountains. My tulips and daffodils bloomed exactly as I'd hoped, bringing bright colors to the gardens I'd replanted. I sat on my porch every morning with coffee, watching the sun rise over the ridges, feeling grateful for the peace I'd fought so hard to reclaim. One Saturday in April, a car pulled into my driveway. I tensed, worried it might be an unwelcome visitor. But when the doors opened, Kaylee and Tyler jumped out, followed by Marcus. He stayed by the car while the kids ran toward the porch. They stopped a few feet away, suddenly shy. Grandma, Kaylee said softly. Dad said we could visit if you said it was okay. I looked past them to Marcus. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking older and more worn down than I'd ever seen him. He didn't approach, didn't presume, just waited to see what I'd decide. Did you bring swimsuits? I asked the kids. Their faces lit up. Yes. The creek is still cold, but you can wade in it if you're careful. Go get changed. They ran back to the car, excited and chattering. Marcus helped them get their bags, then walked slowly toward me. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Mom, thank you for letting them visit. I didn't let them visit for you. I let them visit for them. He nodded, accepting that. I know, and I'm grateful. I won't stay long. I'll drop them off and come back in a few hours to pick them up. Marcus. He looked up, hope and fear mixed in his expression. You can stay, but we're not going to talk about what happened. Not today. Today is just about letting your children know their grandmother. Is that clear? Yes. Completely clear. Thank you. We spent the afternoon like something almost resembling a normal family. The kids played in the creek while Marcus and I sat on the porch, in awkward silence, occasionally commenting on the weather or the kids' antics. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. As they were leaving that evening, Marcus hesitated at his car. "Mom, would it be okay if we came back next month? Same arrangement, just for the kids?" I thought about it for a moment. About trust broken, and slowly, painfully rebuilt. About the long road from betrayal to something resembling peace. "Next month is fine." He nodded, relief visible in his face. "Thank you for everything." After they left, I stood on my porch watching the sun set behind the mountains. My cabin stood solid and secure around me, reclaimed and protected. The battle scars remained, some visible and some not, but the war was over. I'd learned something important through all of this. That being kind doesn't mean being a doormat. That loving your family doesn't mean accepting abuse. That there's a difference between forgiveness and allowing yourself to be victimized. And that sometimes the bravest thing an elderly woman can do is stand up and fight, even when everyone expects her to be silent and compliant. Dorothy Henderson, the girl from the trailer park who became a nurse, who survived widowhood, who built a cabin with her bare hands, had survived one more test, and she'd emerged stronger, wiser and more certain than ever that she deserved respect, dignity, and the right to live her life on her own terms. The cabin would remain mine. The boundaries would remain firm, and anyone who thought age made me weak would learn, as Marcus and Brianna had learned, that they'd seriously underestimated Dorothy Henderson. That night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, looking up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky. Tomorrow I had a speaking engagement at a senior center in Asheville. Next week I was meeting with a woman whose daughter was trying to force her into a nursing home to access her savings. The week after that, I was testifying before a state legislative committee about the need for stronger elder abuse protections. My life had purpose again. Not the purpose of being needed by family who took me for granted, but the purpose of helping others find the strength to protect themselves, of showing people that 70 isn't the end of your power, it's just a different kind of beginning. I'd lost my son at least temporarily. I'd lost my illusions about family loyalty. I'd lost my trust in the people I'd sacrificed everything for. But I'd found something more valuable. I'd found my voice, my strength, and my absolute refusal to be anyone's victim ever again. And in the end, that was worth more than any relationship built on my silence and compliance. The mountains stood eternal around my cabin, and I stood with them, solid and unbending, ready for whatever came next. Every story carries within it an echo of our shared humanity. If this story has touched your heart, share it with someone special. Leave us a comment about what you felt, and subscribe to join us for more soul-reaching stories. Because every life tells a story that deserves to be heard. See you next time.